Alert here on Outnumbered Overtime. I'm Harris Faulkner. If you are just tuning in this afternoon, let me tell you and catch you up on what has happened on a train track outside Charlottesville, Virginia, carrying some estimated 200 members of the Senate and Congress among the Republicans who were traveling for a Republican retreat in West Virginia. There has been at least one fatality already confirmed. We believe it belonged to, or it was a person who was on the truck that's at the center of the screen right there. There was a dump truck on the tracks as this train, this Amtrak train, came barreling down. Some members of Congress have described the speed as upwards of 70 miles per hour. It split that truck, and there were 3 people on board that dump truck, and we are told that one of them has died. And just a short little while ago, we had Congressman Fleischman of Tennessee on with us, and he looked out the window at 12:55 Eastern and said, it looks like they've just now put another person on a stretcher. We can tell you from previous talks that we've had in the last hour or so with members of Congress that 2 people have been airlifted. There have been some fortunate and lighter moments in all of this in terms of hopefulness about the injuries on board. There are several doctors, some of them traveling with this group to go to this retreat. So you had Republican lawmakers who also are doctors on board that train. You had EMTs move in very quickly. Those doctors on board were able to tend to all sorts of injuries, many of them head injuries, because of the concussive force. When the train hit the truck, many people were thrown forward and into the backs of seats, those who were fortunate enough to be in a seat at the time. There were members of Congress who were standing on their feet, tumbling forward, hitting the floor with hard impact. Some of them hurt. We're told no life-threatening injuries at this point, many of them bumps and bruises. And we've been talking with members who actually have had those injuries and described them to us as being some that have left them sore, some feeling some shades of whiplash, others with some nausea. So there are some things playing out on that train. They're also still on board that train. And so now we want to find out what it's like to be inside that train that has been in fits and starts trying to move out of position. They had to put part of that train back on the tracks. They had an engine derail, so they're going to depend on the other engine that has not derailed to get them out of that scene and return them to Charlottesville. On the phone now, Representative Bradley Byrne, Republican congressman from Alabama. You're with us?
I am indeed.
How are you doing?
I'm personally doing very well. I was
Okay.
in my seat when it occurred, and I didn't have any problems.
You no doubt have heard, if not only witnessed as well, people being injured on the train because it felt like a direct impact. Can you tell us what you experienced?
Well, we were traveling through this small town. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary at all, and then there was this very sudden, very hard jolt. I happened to be looking into the car ahead of me, and there was an Amtrak personnel who was standing, and it almost knocked her to the ground. I was worried about her. And then the next thing I realized is that we were slowing down significantly and coming to a stop, and that's when we all knew we hit something. Of course, we didn't know immediately what we had hit. Mm-hmm. People that were closest to the actual place on the track where the accident occurred realized that it was a garbage truck and that there were people in the cab of that truck. We have physicians as members of Congress who got off the train pretty quickly to get to that truck to try to help the people in the truck. We did have some emergency first responders from this town come as well. Obviously, we have one fatality, which is a tragedy. We have another very seriously injured person in that truck, and a third person in that truck who was injured. We don't know how much. We do have a couple of people on the train who were taken off the train, mainly for precautionary measures. One of them probably had a concussion, and they want to take him into town, make sure that he gets the attention he gets so that there's not some ramification from his concussion, but there are no real serious injuries on the train itself.
Okay. You know, Congressman Byrne, we've been trying to get a more firm number of just how many people were traveling. Can you give us, from your vantage point, how many people were on board?
Well, you have a couple hundred members of Congress. You have some family members, including some children, and obviously some staff. So I would say a minimum of 300 people.
Okay. That's a much larger number than we had been working with before. We didn't know if that 200 initially was a mix of spouses and aides, and now you're saying those were members of Congress, and then you go beyond that and begin to add. Virginia's Governor Ralph Northam has tweeted in just the last little while, Virginia public safety agencies are coordinating with local first responders in response to today's train crash outside Charlottesville. Congressman Byrne, what are you seeing outside the window right now? I understand that the train was moving just moments ago.
Yeah, the train is moving. It's moving back towards the direction of Washington, D.C., towards Charlottesville, Virginia. As I understand it, it's just one engine pushing it. And so we're going fairly slowly. And I understand they're going to try to figure out a way to get us back on the path towards our retreat. But there are a lot of people on this train. If they can't get another engine to pull us back to where we need to go, they're going to figure out another means of transportation, which may mean buses. I don't know, which they're still working on. Are
you still determined to go to the retreat?
Well, this is a very important retreat. This is where we set our policy agenda for the coming year. And if we don't do it now, we've got to do it at some point. And this is the time that's been slotted. It's hard to schedule things for Congress when we have all these other things we're voting on. So I'm at least trying to find a way to keep us on track, even if we have to lose a big part of today, try to continue this work on our agenda for the year.
You know, Congressman Fleischman of Tennessee was on with us a short time ago, and he said that this will change the mood, the tone, if you will, at the retreat, that this takes it to, obviously, because what's just played out that you described to us in terms of injuries and the one reported death, a somber level, but also it tends to focus you in a little bit, too. Talk to me about that, if you can.
Well, the mood on the train is very somber. There's no question it's going to change the tone of the mood for the meeting. But these issues we're talking about are very serious. They affect not just the people in each of our districts, but people across the United States of America. And so we need to stay focused on that at the same time that we grieve for the loss of one human being and worry about the lives of others. One of the things we need to talk about is infrastructure. And I'm not saying that this action results in some deficiency in our infrastructure in America, but this underscores the importance of making sure that we not only maintain the infrastructure we've got, but that we continue to modernize it so we can all move around America efficiently but also safely.
You know, you bring up the word infrastructure. You saw where the president was in his State of the Reunion, or State of the Union, rather, last night with that. And again, I hear your point and want to make it, too, that there's no correlation, no straight line between what we're looking at now and the talk about that, with the exception of the fact that you're looking at a train on tracks. And that's how people tend to see these things. Unfortunately, it's not from the vantage point of on a sunny day a great thing has happened. It's because something bad has happened. But that conversation goes far beyond the train industry and so many other areas. And it was such an important part of what the president talked about last night.
No question about it. And I'll tell you, from my vantage point, infrastructure was a very big issue before this incident. But this just underscores, and these accidents happen across America from time to time, underscores the need for us to be continually looking for ways to improve the way that we get around the United States of America, whether it's by car, by train, by boat, or by an airplane.
You know, before I let you go, I want to just look, and people are tuning in for the first time, Congressman, and they're seeing these pictures, and they are pretty daunting. They're from moments ago before you were moving, however slowly you are now, back on one engine on board this large Amtrak train back to Charlottesville, Virginia, the first responders on the ground. I hear leadership like you talk about first responders all the time. I want to just get your last thought about the support you had out there, and then I'll let you go. All right. I think we've lost him on his line, but we appreciate Congressman Byrne being with us from Alabama. Let's look at this picture again and tell you what's happened. Upwards of 300 people now, we've learned, from Congressman Byrne. There were about 200 members of Congress, Republicans, Senate and House, who were headed to a very important retreat in West Virginia. It's where they set their policy going forward, an important retreat that many of them hope to still get to, even considering the tragedy that has happened today. The train that they were riding on hit a truck that was on the tracks, a dump truck, and that impact was direct, according to the members of Congress we've been speaking with, and that caused the carnage that you see on your screen, injuries on the inside of the train, at least one death from the person inside the dump truck. There were several people in the truck. Let's go now to Congressman Roger Marshall of Kansas, who's one of those doctors being talked about today who they were so fortunate to have on board. Congressman, you actually performed CPR on an injured person inside the train. Bring us up to speed.
Well, it is just a tragedy. We also had a big bump. We got around. I was just worried about the setup or what's going on. So we looked, everything was okay. The Capitol Police staff were positioned, got us down there to the scene of the accident. I came upon it, and it looked like Dr. Michael Burgess was with the first patient, along with Dr. Brad Winstrom. Dr. Burgess had airway, was working on that. Dr. Winstrom was assessing for other injuries. I must have tied him. And there was another victim laying there. Dr. Phil Rowe, who's was my mentor, was there trying to get an airway on that person. So I went and helped Dr. Rowe. We could not get a pulse on this person, could not get a good airway on him. Looked pretty bad. So we tried CPR, we tried shocking him, and just never could get him back, I'm afraid.
Oh, Congressman.
So eventually Dr. Rowe and I called that code. Pupils were fixed and dilated and just was going nowhere, and told all the people to turn their attention to the first person. By then, Dr. Cassidy was there, and Dr. Larry Rashawn is a cardiologist, and his wife is an anesthesiologist. Were attending to that person and trying to get a good airway. We got pulse oximetry on, and to their credit, the person had a pulse oxygen status of 87, which was pretty incredible. Had a pulse of 76, and stabilize that person as best we could. EMS showed up, did a great job. Got the person to the ambulance and assumed that they got onto the helicopter okay.
Wow, these are the first time that our viewers and all of us are getting to hear now just how this played out on the ground. Tragedy, as you described it, as you could not save one person. And then you continue to work and work and work and work to save that next life. These are the kinds of things that we normally don't get to hear, Doctor, almost in real time. Congressman Roger Marshall is joining us, who just happened to be on that train with his fellow members of Congress traveling to a retreat. And, it's been described, and we didn't know who they were talking about until now, the person and the people working on those outside the train. As far as you know, the injuries on the inside of the train, can you kind of describe to us, because we've had some people say that many had head injuries. You've gotten back on the train. It's moving now. What are you seeing?
There's quite a few bumps and lumps, headaches, especially the younglings that are with us that were, you can imagine, there's some children that were running in the up and down the aisle. I know when we hit that bump, a couple men hit pretty hard. They all looked okay to me. I didn't see any serious injuries. As we walked through the train, I don't see anybody seriously injured. Someone told me that one person was taken to another hospital, but I did not see that, Congressman. Okay. So I think we're all okay. A little stunned. So many people sitting around me, part of the same situation. Brad Winstrom was the hero there. The coach.
All right. Congressman Marshall, the good news is that you're on a moving train. And what that means sometimes is that your cell signal will go in and out. So we're getting you in bleeps and blurbs. But we heard so much of the important information that you gave us and the fight that you and others put forth to save lives. And we appreciate that perspective. We're so glad you're okay and thankful that you're on the move now. And thank you for your time. All right. We have just gotten word that Vice President Pence has tweeted about this train crash. We had told you the White House has been kept apprised of this over the last couple of hours since this happened. The Vice President's tweet says he's headed to West Virginia later today. He says he's still headed to West Virginia. I've reached out to confirm that fact, but that he is now tweeting about this train crash as the White House and others have been kept up to speed. You heard Dr. Marshall, and I know it was a little hard at points to hear him, but I hope you leaned in as I did, because the important information that he was giving was what it was like to jump off that train. Remember, Rachel Campos Duffy told us last hour that they wouldn't open the doors right away to let the doctors out. They weren't sure where the gas was located, the gasoline, after the impact, and they didn't want there to be an explosion. And if there were, they didn't want anybody to be outside. So they kept people on the train. But these doctors broke through, and they forced their way out, and they went to the people who were injured in that dump truck that the train had hit. And Dr. Marshall, for the very first time, just moments ago, we heard it together, talked about what it was like to try to save a man's life who was inside that dump truck. They lost him. He said they tried, they tried, they tried. You could hear it through the cell phone reception struggles that we were having, but the important words were coming through. And when they had lost that first man, they moved to the next, and they were able to save the second person's life, at least for them. And we had heard of people being airlifted. Now we have confirmation of at least one, because Dr. Marshall worked on that person. Then we got his vantage point from inside the train, describing those injuries that others say they have had and suffered, and he confirmed once again, yes, you're going to have some people with head injuries and you're going to have some bumps and bruises, but nothing like what he had seen outside that train and outside the perimeter of that accident where they had been thrown out of the car, or however imagined, or rather that dump truck. Nothing like what he saw there and the lives that he tried to save. Incredible perspective from Dr. Marshall, also a member of Congress from the Hill, who's traveling today to that Republican retreat. He said, he and others have said today, they are determined to get to the retreat, even if it takes the rest of today to get there in West Virginia. More than ever, they feel that the issues that face Americans are strong on their minds, and they want to get to work. Senior Capitol Hill producer Chad Pergram now joins us by phone. And Chad, you and I have been, and we get to see you in person. Thank you for being here. You and I have been going back and forth on email. And talking about the numbers of people on the train. I want to get your reporting from you now.
Right. We think there's about 200 to 250 people who are on board this train. And that includes members of Congress, Republicans. It includes staffers. It includes security officials from the Sergeant at Arms Office, U.S. Capitol Police, some medical personnel from the Office of the Attending Physician. You know, they pack these up. You have wives, you have children, as you heard from Congressman Duffy's wife a little bit ago. So it's an amalgam of people going to this retreat. And they are determined to get there. We've just been told here in the past 15 minutes or so that they're moving the train back towards Charlottesville. They're going to have buses there, and they're going to continue to the retreat. You know, the amazing thing about this, Harris, is that this is the second year in a row where you've had members of Congress trying to get to their retreat, and someone has been killed. Last year, Senate Democrats were trying to get to Shepherdstown, West Virginia, via bus in the eastern panhandle of West Virginia. Police had closed off the interstate at the intersection of I-70 and 270 to let the bus caravan come through. And there were some dump trucks there, and there was an SUV that stopped. It got caught in between the dump trucks. It erupted in a ball of fire, and the driver of the SUV was killed. They stopped the motorcade. Members of the Senate Democratic Caucus and the security officials here from the Capitol got off to assist. But 2 years in a row now, almost to the date, that was January 25th of last year, that someone has been killed as they try to escort these members of Congress to their annual retreats. The Senate Democrats, in fact, are meeting today. They're having a one-day retreat just a few miles south of Washington, D.C. at Mount Vernon. But you can imagine, you know, the logistics that go in to get these members there, and then you have a tragedy like this, and especially to have one 2 years in a row. Oh,
wow. You know what? We remember reporting on that. I did not remember that the dates were so close, and maybe even a little bit of the circumstances in terms of where they were going. Chad Pergram, we appreciate your reporting. Thank you very much. Let's bring in by phone now Texas Congressman Jeb Hensarling. He joins us now, and I understand, Congressman, the train now has been on the move for, what, about 15 minutes or so? All All right, we are going to continue to probably experience a little bit of phone drop, cell drop, if you will, because this train is moving. And the good news in all of that is that they are moving away from the crash, obviously, and toward the next destination point, which we understand to be Charlottesville, Virginia. We're still waiting to see what the next leg of transportation will look like. There's talk of maybe members and their families and aides being bused from that point to the retreat or to the next point where they would desire to go if they're not going to go on to the retreat, the GOP retreat in West Virginia. We'll continue to try to check in with the members of Congress who are on the train. They do have, many of them, cell phones, and their aides do as well. We know that there are a number of families with small children, even a member of the Fox family, Rachel Campos Duffy, and her husband, Congressman Sean Duffy, on board with 8 of their children. And everybody is safe at this point, according to Rachel, but really traumatized by what they have seen and experienced. And she was the first person to tell us, Rachel Campos Duffy, about the push against the doors to try to get the doctors who serve in Congress outside of that train and onto the ground to help those people who had been hurt in the dump truck that the train hit on the tracks. If you are just joining us, let's do a quick reset now of what has happened, because there are more facts to collect and we want to fold those in. So it's been about 2.5 hours now, by my count, that a train traveling upwards of 70 miles per hour, according to people, witnesses on board the train, hit a dump truck, which you see the remnants of in the center of your screen there, center left, and that truck split. The people inside the truck were very hurt. One of them has perished today. The doctor who performed CPR for several minutes and tried to save his life, along with more doctors in Congress, and then the people showing up, first responders getting there too, trying to save a life, and they couldn't do it. So that is the one confirmed fatality that we have in all of this, and other injuries. Let's try now to pick up that call from Texas Congressman Jeb Hinsarling. Are you with us?
I am.
All right, terrific. I know you're on board a moving train, so sometimes the technology goes in and out. I just want to let you talk. Tell us what's happening.
Well, it's a very, very sobering moment for all Republican members of Congress, knowing that there is at least one fatality. Some of us are here with family members, and it's a time you hold your family close. The train is moving backwards. We are moving to Charlottesville, the closest major urban area to where the wreck occurred. But again, it's a sobering time for us all, knowing there's been one fatality. I saw at least 2 individuals taken off the train. I don't know who they were, as a little bit at a distance, but I've seen 2 of my colleagues have what I hope would be minor injuries. But for anybody who was standing on the train when the wreck occurred, a couple of people went flying. There's no doubt. It was a huge bump. The train did not appear to be slowing down at all, so I can only think that the truck kind of came out of nowhere. I'm sure it'll be thoroughly investigated. But again, a sobering, somber moment, and you just want to reach out at your family. You also recall how many friends you have, because the cell phones have been going off nonstop for people checking on us. But there will be a lot of prayers for the individual who passed away, and as I understand it, there's one more in critical condition.
Absolutely. Congressman Hinsarling, you're giving us that vantage point now of a train moving backwards at a very slow pace on the one engine that did not derail. That is a longer journey than anybody had anticipated at this point, but you are on the move. Are you traveling with aides, friends, family, and are you intending to head on to the retreat?
I think we're going to go ahead with our retreat. Certainly, again, we are sobered. There are prayers that will be had, but we're also here to do the people's business. This retreat has gone on every year since I've been a member of Congress. Both parties have these retreats. They are important for the planning of the people's business, so we will go forward. But again, it is a much more sobering and somber gathering than we had anticipated. And my family's back in Texas at the moment, and I wish I was a little closer to them at the moment.
Yes, as you said, you find out who loves you by your phone ringing, and yours has been ringing off the hook. We are glad that you're okay, and we hope that the journey continues to be now that you have left the crash site a smooth one. Thank you for joining us by phone. Be safe.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right, so you heard the congressman just saying moments ago that there were 2 people who were taken off the train track, off the train and transported to local hospitals. I want to give you the detail that I'm now getting. This is an incident update, if you will, on that Amtrak train that came into contact with a truck that was on the tracks a little bit more than 2 hours ago, 11:20 East Coast time. Crozet, Virginia, just outside by about 12 to 15 miles, Charlottesville. 2 Amtrak crew members and 2 passengers were transported to a local hospital. We're told with minor injuries, but they were taken off that train. That is in addition to the 3 people that we know were more severely injured inside the truck that the train hit, the truck that was on the tracks. One we know has perished, the other in more serious condition. The third condition of that third person, rather, the condition of, we do not know at this point. And if we do know it, maybe it's mixed up in some of these other numbers and we can't delineate that. But we can tell you that Dr. Marshall, the congressman there who joined us, who was one of those who jumped to the rescue and tried to save the life of the one man who has perished, was on with us a short while ago. That was our first opportunity to hear what this would have looked like with hands-on trying to save lives and what people in the windows could see. Because we've talked with enough members of Congress and witnesses now who say that they could see it play out. There were 3 or 4 cars down. Some of them were on their feet when this happened. Others of them were part of that medical group that they were so fortunate to have on that train because, of course, the livelihoods of many of the members of Congress can stretch across many different industries. And in this case, the profession was medical. And so they were fortunate to have those doctors on board and to get that perspective from a doctor who tried to save a life, the one point of view that you really want in all of this. We had that on the phone just a short time ago. We've also called in our own doctor. Dr. Mark Siegel, who's sitting alongside. And Dr. Siegel, I want to let everybody know that you're here. We're still trying to get phone communication with people both on board the train and also talking with our own staff. Some of our staff is traveling up to cover the retreat, so on and so forth. So we got a lot of assets moving around. You're one of them. Concussions, head injuries. Talk to me about what might have happened as people hit the backs of those seats, those who were seated.
Well, actually, Harris, you don't know that in advance. You know that once you examine a patient, they may not know at the time that they're even suffering from a head injury or dizzy or headache. They can develop it hours later. Hospitals in the area you mentioned, University of Virginia, Charlottesville has a level 1 trauma center. It's a very top center. The trauma surgeons on call in the hospital 24/7. So they're clearly, I know a couple of people were airlifted. They can clearly analyze the situation readily, and the doctors on the scene can as well. The doctors on the scene went to the truck. As you said, Dr. Representative Marshall did CPR. There was a cardiologist there. There was an anesthesiologist there. That's very heroic. The thing I worry about with the dump truck, of course, is a crush injury. You know, that it collapses from the train hitting it. And then in the train themselves, you said, people can fly around. Luggage, we've talked about this before. Luggage is on seats, it's on the floor, it flies in the air, and people get hit.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. We're talking about a situation where there are no seat belts that are mandated. And nobody today, you know, we had one lawmaker on who said he was on the Transportation Committee, and he was saying, you know what, I know a lot about this. I'm not saying that there needs to be an order to put seat belts on trains. I'm just simply telling you that stuff flies around, which is exactly what you're saying.
Right. That's why.
Stuff and people.
Right. And that's why I'm on the side of wanting seatbelts, but I would point out that trains themselves are built in a way like buses are, with open compartments. So if, God forbid, you are flying around, you're less likely to hit something. That's not enough of an answer. I think you need both. I think you need a compartment that's constructed this way and also have seatbelts. And, we don't know what speed the train was traveling, but
Well,
from your last guess, it sounds like it was traveling pretty fast.
Actually, from very early on, Congressman Mark Walker told us that he thought it was traveling upwards of 70 miles per hour. I mean, they were just cooking along, not expecting to find anything on the tracks. I mean, there was no word of any indication. We don't know this until they investigate, but he said it was moving. It was moving pretty quickly.
So if you're in a truck and you get hit at 70 miles an hour, you can have a heart attack, you can bleed. These are very common.
Wow, 70 miles
tragic.
per hour to 0. All right, let's take a look at the left side of our screen. These are live pictures of Charlottesville, Virginia. This is where the train is headed. And remember, they're expecting to get on buses to take the lawmakers, their aides, their family members to the Greenbrier resort in West Virginia. We've got Pete Ducey. Peter Ducey is in Charlottesville waiting for that train to arrive. And this is also, you see a bus off to the side. I want to get more details. Maybe Peter can get to those details. Peter?
Harris, we just pulled into downtown Charlottesville at the Amtrak station here. I'm moving along the bridge because the state police from Virginia have it completely shut down. They're trying to keep it clear, but they did say we could take some pictures as long as we keep going. What I can see right now so far, in addition to a bunch of police and more coming, are 7 coach buses that are pulling up. They've been going through a security sweep, and I apologize with the slight delay. You're going to see some tree cover here, but we've got 7 buses and then a lot of security. It looks like at least one vehicle that they would be using to transport maybe a member of leadership or somebody else with a detail, and a lot of other local authorities and state authorities who are waiting outside the Amtrak station. It seems like a lot of folks just found out that this is where they need to be to meet up with this 200-plus member delegation of Congress because they are locking it down more and more by the minute. And we believe right now that we're about within 20 miles of where the crash site happened. So we think that they should be here, considering that there was damage to the train and they are going backwards within the next half an hour. But we are standing by right now, Harris, with all of the Charlottesville police, the Virginia State Police, and the Capitol Police who are on the ground, as well as the authorities overhead monitoring things, just to get some more reaction and to get our first look at these lawmakers who just experienced this trauma this morning, Harris.
Yeah, I was trying to remember who it was who was on the Transportation Committee moments ago who gave us such great details. It was Jeff Denham of California, and he was talking with Amtrak officials on the ground at the crash site. And the reason I say this, Peter, is because that was the first that we heard that there had been some sort of derailment with this train. Now, it wasn't the entire train, obviously, but there was one engine that they lost in the crash, and they needed to lift part of that train back onto the tracks, according to Denham at the time. Now, maybe the investigation has moved forward, but what we do know is that, as you pointed out, they're traveling on one engine, and that the other engine did derail. There were 2. And it's moving very slowly, going backwards, and we know that from all the congressmen and senators whom we talked with in the last couple of hours. And you couple that with the fact that you do have some injuries on board, however minor. Some of them are head injuries, and so they're going to be extra cautious. So you will sit tight until they arrive. I'm curious to know, Peter, what's being told to the family members who are gathered on the ground, because they're going to have a command center situation in pretty short order with a ton of questions coming from people.
Harris, I hate to interrupt you, but the train right now with the congressional delegation is arriving at the station in Charlottesville. It is, as you can see, very slow moving. I'm looking all the way down the track. I'm going to try to keep the picture steady since I am holding an iPhone right now and trying not to have it too shaky. But the train, it looks to be at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's more than a dozen cars long. There's no obvious damage yet, and because of some of the glare, it is hard for us to see inside. But as you can see right here, the first look at this train that collided with the truck heading backwards now into Charlottesville, and in the foreground, where a little bit between us and the truck, and the train cars, you can already see that the authorities are moving into action, and some of them are blocked by buses, but they are heading to the doors. And not every door on an Amtrak train like this normally opens. So they are heading to the doors that we expect to open. And now we wait, Harris.
Right. Peter Ducey reporting for us there in Charlottesville, Virginia, where we were told this train would trek the 12 to 15 miles from the crash site of where it had hit a dump truck on the tracks. It has now arrived. I want to point out again, this was on one remaining engine going backwards, and this train has just pulled in, where we know people, as Peter was pointing out, have just figured out moments ago that this is where this thing is coming, and if you want to meet somebody on this train, you got to get there. You've got the buses that are in place. Peter, we believe those are available for the congressional members, their aides, the families that are on board to jump on and continue on to whatever destination they will be going to. Many of them have confirmed to us on the air that they intend to keep on their route to the Republican retreat, where they were headed to the Greenbrier Resort in West Virginia. They say that they have the people's work to do and that they will be doing the people's work. That's what we're hearing from some of the members of Congress. They say it's important now more than ever to show their resolve to get their jobs done and to do what Americans expect them to do. A lot of big words and big hearts today and somber feelings. Some of those congressional members telling me that this changes the complete mood, as you might know, turning it to somber at their retreat. But you had Rachel Campos Duffy and her husband, Sean Duffy, a member of Congress, and their 8 children on board. They are all okay, and they were saying, yeah, this changes things. So Peter Ducey was capturing the train moving into the depot there in Charlottesville, Virginia, on his iPhone, and simultaneously trying to narrate a little bit of what we could see. When Peter first arrived, he was the only member of the media that he could see that was prepared to capture all of that. So we are seeing it first here on Fox, no doubt. People are figuring out now this is where they need to be. We will await word on how people on board the train are doing. And we've got John Hyatt, who has been along with me for breaking news in instances like this prior. He's a railroad investigator. John, you're with us by phone. As this train moves in, your thoughts?
Well, there's a lot of things to unpack here. Of course, there's so much that we don't know. Very tragic, and my sympathies, of course, the family members, the person that lost their life. It's a very unusual crossing. I mean, the first thing that jumped out at me when I looked at it was it is an elevated crossing, which you're coming up an incline to the crossing from at least from the side that we can see. Of course, the train was traveling from right to left as you guys were showing it on the screen. I don't know if there was gates at this crossing. It was hard to see because it was obstructed, but there are a set of red lights that you'll see there. And I noticed from early on in the footage they weren't activated, but they may have shut those off manually at the site. And then I noticed when the train was pulling out of there again, they weren't flashing, but that could be that they were manually shut down. But also something to take note of is the visual. As you're coming up that crossing, you'll notice on both sides it's quite tree lined and it's coming out of a curve. So obviously this truck needs to heed to the warnings that are there. But we always have to question whether or not those warning signals were working properly also. There's 3 people in the cab of that truck, apparently, and to not see these red lights, and it looks in that view that we're seeing right there, It looks as though there's a crossing gate there on the right side. You can just see that little piece of white coming out. That's a crossing gate.
I see that, but you know it better than I do. I would not have known that that's what that was.
And if it's still intact, that means that the truck didn't go through the crossing gate, that they came down after the fact, which is a little bit, I mean, that's just by looking at this picture. They could have been put down manually, but why are they still intact? There in that picture right there, you can see a crossing arm. And I'm not even sure which side the track the truck was coming from. Obviously, most of the truck ended up on our side of the track, the TV side of the track. But as you look up in that photograph right there, look at that foliage. Look at the view as you're coming up. If he was coming from our side, yeah, it's different.
It's a question. It's a question, and you say that this is so early in the investigation, but those are the sorts of things they'll be looking at. That's a very forensic look. And again, I mean, with my eyes, I don't have your investigators' experience. I would not necessarily have seen that, but that's why people like you are on site to look for those things that are not consistent with a crash site, or what you might anticipate that things would be like when you look at the carnage here. And that's an interesting observation. Did it come down after? What happens now in this investigation? They've just gotten this train moving. That train, by the way, I'm curious too, John, it's part of the scene of all of this, but now it's gone to another place. Is that problematic?
That's very interesting that you said that. I don't think in any other instance probably that train would have been moved. I have to believe that it was probably done because of the precious cargo, so to speak.
Human life on board, they needed to move.
Yeah, you know what? We need to answer some questions. That's like lower on the list. Perhaps they had answered those questions to their satisfaction and decided it was okay. I also noticed they moved backwards early on, and it looked like they did that to access the ambulance and getting the people off the train that needed medical care. So obviously they had determined that the track was in good condition and that they had gotten the front trucks of that locomotive back on track. But it was unusual. I was surprised to see them move it. I thought they would have busted them from that location. But there's so many unanswered questions. But again, a tragic, and I'm glad. You know, maybe can these people imagine on that train as we had last month out here in Seattle?
Right.
You know, they had a lot worse result, but the centrifugal forces and the inertia inside these cars is scary. And my hat's off to all those people that attended to the people and responded the way they did, including the onboard employees and the responders.
Yeah, I mean, we had the members of Congress who were doctors who performed CPR on the people who were inside that dump truck, and just hearing that first-person perspective of trying to save a life that they couldn't save and how hard they tried. And there was another life that they could save. I mean, those are the types of things. That's the human condition. That's the human element in all of this. And as you and I look forensically at why this happened and how it happened and why they moved the train, you're right, that's lower down the list. Those are the next steps, though, that they'll look at because we want to prevent it from happening again. Charlottesville, Virginia. Peter Ducey has an iPhone up. John Hyatt is along with us as an investigator of the railroad. So we've got experience on one hand and a pretty unique picture on the other through an iPhone there to show us that train arriving. And Peter, I don't know if you can still talk with us because you're filming with your phone, but if Peter's able to hear us, I don't think he can. We can see him, but we can see what he can see, but he can't talk to us yet. Multitasking, I'm sure. So my question would be, and I don't know if you can see this picture or what you know about this train, but it looked like a lot of cars. Peter was trying to count them, and he couldn't count them all. With his cell phone, he couldn't see them all. Yeah,
it looks like they had quite a crew on there, and I don't have a final number on it. But
sure,
that's a large group, for sure. Yeah,
they were saying, one of the members of Congress we talked with said that there were about 200 GOP members of the House and Senate on the way to this Greenbrier Resort in West Virginia for their huge policy-making, policy agenda-setting, very important retreat in West Virginia. Many of them still determined to go even after what's happened today, the tragedy that's happened today. So then you add on the family members and the aides, and it could be upwards, if not more, between 250 and 300 people. That's quite a few people to have to move. We were talking about why would they move a train. I don't know if the location where they were you could even really get buses to. We won't know the answers to all these questions, but we ask them because we see buses all in our view here. So we know the next step is to put them on those buses. John, talk to me a little bit about what's going on at that crash site right now. With the train gone, what are they looking at?
Well, obviously, they're going to be testing the crossing signals and make sure that those are working properly. There's a lot of things to do along those lines. That equipment is very important and very crucial, and some of it's set to a certain speed, and if that setting is incorrect or something, the crossing arms don't come down promptly. They come down a little late. There are just so many options, but that's what they'll be looking at out there. And they'll be looking at the same things I talked about the visual approach and how well you can see coming into that crossing. And of course, there'll be a head-end camera, outward-facing camera on the locomotive that will tell us a lot of the stories. But I can tell you this, this is an epidemic. We really have so many crossing accidents going down right now, and it's part of the infrastructure problem. I mean, you increase rail traffic, and you are going to increase crossing accidents. So it's part of the infrastructure plan, I hope, is to figure out a way to protect these crossings a little bit better. And obviously, you see red flashing lights or you see crossing arms, you got to stop. You can't be taking any chances. But when people have their windows up and their radio on and they don't hear a train whistle, things can happen.
All right. John, how long have you been doing this?
25 years as an investigator, 10 years as an engineer.
So as I hear you and you say the crossing accidents are an epidemic, that's coming from a place of knowing. You've been there a long time. We appreciate your experience and you sharing with us your expertise. John Hyatt, railroad investigator, thank you. I want to turn now to a spokesperson for the Congressional Institute and a statement that we have just received. Remember, moments ago, we had part of our crew, Chad Pergram, on. Our correspondent, Mike Emanuel, is also on the story, so Mike is sending this out. Again, the Congressional Institute, quote, this is a statement regarding the incident involving the train carrying members of Congress. After a consultation with leadership in the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate, the retreat will proceed with an adjusted program. Our thoughts and prayers are with those impacted by today's incident. That program will now include a moment of prayer for those involved in today's incident and a security briefing from the Sergeant of Arms and United States Capitol Police. Let's go now to the Texas Congressman Michael Burgess. He is one of the doctors who administered aid. We've been getting this very important one-person account of what happened. I will call you doctor for this period at least. Great to have you on board here. Tell us what you experienced today.
Harris, thanks first off for having me on. Riding in the train in the passenger compartment, there was a pretty big jolt or bump and made you wonder what the heck was going on. But the scene out the side of the window as the train came to a rapid stop was the wreckage from the vehicle that was impacted. There were 3 individuals in the vehicle. One appeared to be deceased. One was transported with very serious injuries, and one apparently was able to walk to the ambulance on his own. So that was the injury report in the immediate aftermath. It appears the crossing arms were down. They appeared to be functional. There were the lights on the crossing arms seemed to be working. Obviously, I don't know if they were down before the vehicle entered the intersection, but they, as I left the train, they were in the position you would expect.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell me about some of the other injuries inside the train? I mean, we have been hearing first-person accounts of head injuries, people falling to the floor.